So, welcome and thank you all so much for coming. Just as a reminder, today we are going to be covering a mini lesson featuring AI literacy, taught by my colleagues and two of our faculty leads for the Digital Strategy Certificate, and I'll give them a moment to introduce themselves in just a second. The goal of today's lesson is really just to give a sense on how we frame discussions around AI and our approach in the Digital Strategy Certificate. And after the mini lesson, we're going to take just a moment to go over some labor market trends with AI use. And then for anyone here who is a prospective student, we're also going to take a moment to go over very basic program information. Um, and we have a lot to cover, so I am going to jump in and get started with some brief introductions. And I'll invite Jamie to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Kelly, and I'm the Director of Certificate and Non-Degree Programs and very involved with Penn LPS Online and our certificates. Christina?
Um, you've heard me speak already, but my name is Christina Tarosian. I am the academic advisor for the majority of our certificate programs, including digital strategies. So anyone here who is in the certificate or wants to be happy to be of support, and I will pass it on to my colleague, Dr. Coleman.
Thanks, Christina. So I'm Clay. I am the Director of Curriculum Design for Arts and Sciences Online Learning. I'm also a person who teaches in Digital Strategy Certificate and is a co-oversight person with Dr. Krieger, who I'll pass it off to now.
Thanks, Clay. I'm Dr. Meryl Krieger, and I also wear multiple hats. I'm senior learning designer on the Arts and Sciences online learning team, and I've helped develop a lot of the BAS curriculum along with Dr. Coleman. And I also teach in and co-lead the Certificate of Digital Strategies with him.
Thank you all. So now that we have introduced ourselves, I'm going to pass the floor over to Dr. Krieger and Dr. Coleman. Feel free to take it away.
Excellent. So today, in this brief mini lesson, we're going to be talking about what it means to use digital tools in different contexts. Now, these contexts will depend on what you share, and we'll get into that in a second, but it's going to be involving working specifically with AI. And I'll pass it off to my colleague to talk about today's exploration.
Thank you. So what we wanted to introduce you all to is a little bit about how each of us in our respective courses in DIGC explore how digital tools shape the way we learn, work, and connect. And so the way we've broken this up is Dr. Coleman has an exercise that he's going to have you do, and then I have a segment of it where we're going to reflect on some of the pieces of this, and then we'll be talking it out and giving you some takeaways. So I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Coleman so we can move on.
Thank you. So we mentioned that this is a mini lesson, which means that we have time constraints, right? So we have 10 minutes to do the following. So I'm going to talk about what you're going to be doing, and I'm going to give you time to do it. I'm going to set a timer for myself so we stay on task. So the first thing I would love for you to consider or to do is to identify something that you'd like to do. It could be a hobby. It can be a lifelong interest. My recommendation is that you pick something easy. Now, part of the reason why we're starting this way is that this grows out of an exercise and set of activities that we do in digital culture classes like DIGC 1200. And it revolves around this idea of positive obsession. Positive obsession is something that you are interested in, that you can spend a lot of time on, and that brings you joy in some ways, right? So I'm going to ask you to identify something like that for yourself. As I mentioned before, a hobby, a lifelong interest, or something like that. And then after that, I'm going to ask you to outline a very, very short story that explains it to someone who isn't your teacher. So someone who doesn't already have a vested interest in this, right? After that, after you kind of outline that very short story, I'm going to ask you to copy your story idea into an AI platform. So for this purpose, we're going to be using Microsoft Copilot, which is an AI tool, a generative AI tool that you'll have access to in courses like Dixie 1200 and Dixie 1600, right? So thanks, Meryl, for sharing that in the chat. I've linked the actual kind of URL address for this tool, and Meryl have shared it in the chat. Your task here is to figure out how to get Copilot to do this effectively, right? So copy your idea into Copilot and ask the tool to make your story compelling to a person or audience of your choice, right? So Copilot will try to do this. You want to coach it to do it effectively. And you might want to consider these questions, right? Once you're in that platform and copied it over. How does your story relate to the interests and the needs of a chosen audience? So you choose an audience and try to persuade them. And how do you persuade them to care? Okay. So again, just to reiterate, you create a story, outline it very short. You copy that story into Copilot, and then you try to get Copilot to help that story be compelling to a person or an audience of your choice, and try to coach it into doing that. So you have about 7 minutes now to do that. I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to give you a chance to play around with this tool. After that, you're going to hold on to what you see and take notes about it, and I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Dr. Krieger.
Okay, I too, if you can flip to the next slide for me. Thank you. I too am starting a timer in just about a minute. So I hope you found that exercise interesting. I want you to think about what you just did and take notes about this. We're going to come back and talk about the doing of this exercise as well as some of the important things around it. And Dr. Coleman and I have some takeaways for you at the end of it. I want to kind of point out something that I hope you all have figured out by now, something that's pretty um, basic to the Dig C certificate is that you're going to be doing a lot more. We're not going to be spending all of our time talking at you because we really want you to be thinking about what is relevant about these tools and technologies that we are engaging with to you. And so if you think about some of the ways Dr. Coleman framed the question you were exploring, I want you to see just the extent to which this is about you and the things that are relevant in your life. So with that in mind, what was interesting or challenging about doing the exercise? And especially important, was there anything new about it to you? So that's the first thing I want you to answer. And then the second thing, and this is where I think the meat of it is, how do you deal with something new? How do you explain something that's new to you to someone else? Now, I'm going to also set a timer for 10 minutes. And I am starting it right now. So if you want to go back and look at the dialogue you had with Copilot, I'm assuming it was a dialogue that you were iterating with it, and think about what are the things that stood out for you as new or different or hard that you had to think about. So what about it was new to you? And then once you've kind of got that labeled, how do you deal with something that's new? And this is something I want you to put in your notes because we'll talk about it. And then how would you explain that new thing to some other person? Again, not your teacher. Then I'm going to stop our timer and I'm going to let us move on to the conversation. So tell us what you found out, folks. Anybody who wants to come off mute and talk about it, that's great. If you want to put it in the chat, that's great.
Hi, Candace here.
Hi, Candace.
It was simpler than I thought. It was far less intimidating than I thought. Um, I put my instructions in very simply as we were directed. I used bullets
Mm-hmm.
and it came right out and it wasn't exactly my language. And so I probably would tweak that, but I was like, this is it, but it was far less intimidating than I thought.
Clay, I'm leaving this one in your court. I want to let
Yeah.
you talk them through the exercise.
So yeah, so thanks for sharing that, Candace. And it's heartening to know that when you got to play around and dig into the actual tool, it became less mysterious, right? And less intimidating. And I think that that's part of the goal of working with some of these tools in the digital strategy certificate, right? And it's also about the process. And it sounds like Eddie, you said that you felt the same. It was easier than you thought. So some of the things that we consider when we're in these classes is about the medium that we're using, right? So remember in the beginning or during that activity when I was asking you to consider your audience, oftentimes when we use different mediums, it impacts how and what we communicate to that audience, right? So we talk a lot about that in digital strategies. We talk about the audience, but also we talk about the ways that persuasion happens in those spaces, right? So there are different techniques for persuasion that happens in digital environments on a daily basis. And sometimes we don't recognize those techniques in the moment, right? So part of the process is to take some time to stop, to reflect, and to think about the different components of what we do and how other people might be doing similar things, and how sometimes those techniques and practices might be hidden in plain sight. So again, this idea that it's easier than you thought can then give you license to start to not only play around, but to consider some of the steps that go into that act of persuasion.
Yeah. Anybody else? Because I want to let y'all process through the first half of the exercise before we jump into my half.
I'll go first. I'm John. Hi, everyone, or Johnny, whichever one is what's it called is more easier to, say.
Hey,
For
Johnny.
Dr. Coleman exercise, my co-pilot, I'm very like fluid with my co-pilot. I've used it for a very long time. Um, I've been a very big fan of artificial intelligence for like I think since 2009 when Grammarly started publishing their first beta. Um, so when Copilot came in, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have fun with this. And I've always been aware of the limitations of artificial intelligence, and I've always known the flaws. And I used my Copilot for the exercise, and I forgot how bleak my Copilot is. So for my exercise, it went from, oh, I like to breathe every day, right? That's a very simple, very simple topic. And then it just gave me a very depressing and a very long answer. And I was like, okay, this is definitely my co-pilot. Definitely not just the bare basic one that they offer everyone. Um, but when it comes to digital persuasion, obviously, even with other individuals' examples, it's meant to cater to whoever is putting it in or sending it into the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
a really excellent point. And that's one of the foundational points, right? What you put in is what you receive, but also oftentimes that might be different depending on the context, depending on how the interactions you've kind of built over time play into that, and even the ways that you frame these things, right? Um, Eddie wrote, being easy can create some intimidation since we are talking with a machine and not a human being,
That's
right?
so true. That's very
Yeah,
It is so true. Yeah.
yeah. Um, Johnny, you mentioned that your response was got bleak. Were there other people's responses that came out in ways that you didn't expect, or ways that made them think a little bit more about the platforms?
so. I did conduct an exercise similar to this when I believe it was 2021 when there was this TikTok trend or TikTok sound. It was like Daisy, Daisy, give me a wish. It was from the 1950s. That was the first official artificial intelligence um, like recording. And my school decided to push in like this, preparation of, hey, like let's look into this a little bit. Um, when it comes to persuading and just like how it presents, again, kind of similar to what Esther Lastman said, it is just catered to us in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I will admit I was very intimidated by artificial intelligence. So this will kind of connect to Dr. Krieger's exercise. When it comes to how new artificial intelligence is, it's always like evolving. And for me personally, I'm a very paranoid person, so I overthink all the time. If you guys had a degree in overthinking, I'd probably, graduate in like less than 2 minutes. But besides the point, when it comes to artificial intelligence, it is something that is always going to be a concern in everyone's head, no matter how vulnerable anyone can be. A good example that I'd like to use, also, sorry for talking so much. A good example that I'd like to use recently, two parents were trying to file a lawsuit to ChatGPT because unfortunately their son passed away due to a suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, wow, like AI has gotten so advanced from a simple, computer recording to a whole entire like generative robot that we can talk to freely.
So many things to say about that.
Yeah.
We'll say we get into exploring AI and the ethics of AI. That actually is something that I teach in Dixie 3600. That's a summer class for those of you who are interested. I don't want to eat up too much time because we have two other people with their hands up, and I
Okay.
want to make sure that they get to kind of share their thoughts. And then I have a couple of things I want to respond as we go, but I want to let AR, I'm not sure what your name is.
Anna.
Anna, go for it.
Hi, Christina. Um, so I find that artificial intelligence is, it's very technical, and that is basically what its feedback is. I think it's a great reference point. I think it would be great for artistic expression and so forth. It's very handy. However, Um, your exercise was kind of futile for me because I brought up the app and I couldn't get in. I couldn't get in. I had to create a password and yada yada. And I typed in actually photography. And what did it bring up? The techniques of photography, how to do a landscape, da 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 da. Um, if I were to describe something to someone that was your question, I would take a step-by-step description, depending on how difficult it was. That's how I would do it. But I'm a human. Anyway, that's it. Computers are great. They're very helpful. That's what I have to say about that.
Thank you, Anna. Ross, you had your hand up too.
Thank you. I took an AI class this summer and it was supposed to use ChatGPT, but I found myself pasting everything into ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude just to see what different would come out of them. And I had a shortcut to Copilot, but I hadn't really used it because, four chats was one too many. So this was the first time I put something into chat. I was blown away. I also pulled up Gemini and Chat and Claude, and it was really nice. I'm gonna have to add it to the list, but it really enhanced nicely what I had put in. I was pleasantly surprised to see how well it did. I just assumed it being kind of an offshoot of Chat GPT, it wasn't going to be that different, but it was. I was surprised. It's nice. Thank you.
They're all different. They're all different. I want to kind of build on what a few of you are saying. And Emily, thank you for putting your findings in the chat. That's really helpful. I want you to notice that you're all taking on pieces of this idea of newness here in ways that are relevant for you. And newness means something different to each of us. Some of you are thinking about the technology is new. Some of you are thinking about the platform is new. Some of you are thinking about the question that you're asking is new. One of the things that actually the class that I'm teaching in fall 2, Dixie 1600, explores is how do we as humans deal with this problem of newness? And it's something that we spend most of the course unpacking. And another piece of that is where I was really going with this question about how you explain it to somebody else. If you think about the language you use, When you think about who you're talking to, you have to find ways of explaining things to them that you know that they're going to understand. Because if you talk about things in the way that's relevant to you, think about when they miss it, when you end up talking past each other. And we have that kind of conversation happening a lot in our world because we all have different ideas about what new means. So one of the places I kind of want to leave you with from my part of this is that one of the tools we often use is metaphors. And metaphors become a way that we can make connections for people. So I hope that that gives you a little bit. I love responses or comments about that. Folks are thinking. Folks are thinking. But I'm glad to see that reducing the intimidation factor. This is an important part of what we're up to. Audience is absolutely key.
I'd like to say something quick just because I've been kind of like over speaking, but
You're
I'll
fine.
I've always been a very considerate person when it comes to who I speak to, who I inform. Audience is key, like Ross did, what's it called, reiterate, but also your tone of voice has a large impact on it as well.
Yes.
If you are speaking in a fast pace and you're moving around, you're jittery, your body language is all over the place, you're just this big walking ball of anxiety explaining what artificial intelligence is, best believe again if this topic is new to them, symbolic interactionism, right? It's they're gonna now have an impression of, all right, this is terrifying. I don't trust artificial intelligence. Johnny had a whole entire manic episode, and I don't even know if he's bipolar, talking about artificial intelligence. I'm staying away from it. Compared to someone who, again, it's a new topic for them, and you approach them with an open mind. You make sure that if they don't know anything about it, you are a little bit more conservative about it. You don't just dump them a bunch of information to overwhelm their mind and overstimulate them. You start off a little bit, you go like, "Hey, this is artificial intelligence. I just learned about the history of it. I just learned that Copilot, you need to have an account. There's different ways to respond to a Copilot chat. And would you like to know more about it? Is there anything I could help you out with?" Essentially, kind of like customer support, but with your own twist.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, Johnny, and the ways that you were thinking about it in terms of dialogue. Um, I think too, there were a couple of folk who talked about the difference between humans and machines, and I know that we're running up on time, but I would be remiss if I did not mention that the information that these machines pull, so the data that it calls or things like that, come from humans. So we want to assume that there are some things baked in, including potential biases, different perspectives, and the various kind of experiences and contexts that shape how we understand the world. So even as we interact with it, we should never assume that these platforms are neutral, right? We should never assume that they're quote unquote objective. And I think you're speaking to that, Johnny. I see other people speaking to that in the chat as well. And those are the types of things that we talk about in the digital strategy certificate. The ethics piece, as Meryl mentioned, the human piece that's embedded in the technology, right? And also to what other implications, uses for these technologies have. And I'm thinking specifically not only ethical in terms of how we understand our relation to it, but also how we understand our relation to the larger world, right? The environmental impacts and factors. And all these things are things that we talk about when we discuss
Yeah.
relations with and uses for AI. And I'll stop speaking and pass it off to my colleague Krieger, Dr. Krieger, to wrap it up.
I think, Dr. Coleman, I think you got a lot of it there. I will say that um, we have designed the certificate to kind of give you pieces of a perspective that is kind of holistic when we think about digital technology more broadly. We all have a strong interest in AI, and so as you can probably guess, this shows up in a lot of our classes for a reason. Um, and what we're after is helping you understand how to use the tools, helping you understand why to use the tools, and also helping you think about a little bit behind the door of how they're developed so that you kind of have a sense for, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Annie was talking about the fact that this is technology and it's complicated, and to understand how to read that. What do you need to know so that it's not so mysterious, so that you can use it like any other tool? And I think I will hand it back to our colleagues with that. Unless, Clay, did I miss anything?
No, I think this is good. Thank you all for participating in this
Yeah,
session.
thank you so much. This was a joy.
All right. We'll take it over to go over some very basic, program information, especially from like a program academic advising standpoint. And to kick it off, really, we want to take a moment to go over some labor market trends that we discovered actually doing some research on how employers are expecting employees to use AI. Um, so this might be helpful information and this might not be new, but what we're finding really is that based on multiple reports like the World Economic Forum, reports done by LinkedIn, there really is a growing expectation that everybody understand how to use AI in their jobs. And we're finding that there's an increase almost by 70% by 2030 for people to understand and to train themselves on AI literacy, which again is just one part of a much larger skill set within digital strategies. Um, and so the purpose of the certificate is to give you an opportunity to experiment with digital tools, to understand them in context. Um, so we leave this information here for you just for your reference. Um, and with that, we'll move on to the actual certificate and some of the course offerings we have.
Thank you so much, Christina. So Penn LPS Online is part of the University of Pennsylvania. We actually launched the first Ivy League online bachelor's degree several years ago. And now we have 13 different certificates that are available. The one that we are focusing on today, as mentioned a few times, is digital strategies. That's where the mini lesson was offered from. So you can take a look at all of our offerings here.